Hey, ni hao. This is Mr. Howard, and this is my second podcast. Last podcast, Mr. Givens and I talked about the Shang Dynasty, its rise, its developments and fall, looking at the different characteristics of civilization. This time, this is in episode 2, we are looking at the Dynastic Cycle. Okay, so the sources I used, my tried and true source about Chinese history is the book China and New History. Got it a couple of years ago. It's an engaging read. I highly recommend it. I also refer to History Alive, the Medieval World and Beyond. There's a chapter about Imperial China, focusing on the government. And then also a high school world history textbook called World History Connections to Today. Okay, and so what we're looking at today is a concept called the dynastic cycle. Now, this is a historical pattern that the Chinese recognized thousands of years ago, going all the way back to about 1000 BCE. Before we get to this idea of the dynastic cycle and this historical pattern, which is really helpful in understanding the pattern of Chinese history, we need to understand another idea that originated in China called the mandate of heaven. Okay, this goes back to 1027 BCE. As you might recall in the last podcast, we talked about the Shang Dynasty and how it eventually would fall to the Zhous. Okay, the Zhous were neighbors to the east, and they would come in and conquer them. And they developed this concept called the mandate of heaven that they used to justify their rebellion from the Shang Dynasty. Originally, they'd been underneath the Shang kings. And in a nutshell, what it is they taught everyone that emperors and dynasties that have the blessings of their gods of the heavens have the right to rule. And if they start making bad choices, if they're not being good rulers, then they can lose that mandate of heaven. And that's why it's okay to rebel against them and for another family to come in and take over. Okay? In a nutshell, that's it. So that's the mandate of heaven. And this is how it connects to the dynastic cycle. And when you think of the dynastic cycle, because it has the word cycle in it, think of things like the weather cycle. You know, how it starts with rain clouds, rain falls when there's enough water vapor in the air, hits the ground. Because of sunlight, evaporation occurs, that water vapor goes back up in the air, condenses into clouds, and so you have this circular pattern. The dynastic cycle is very similar. Okay, so what happens is you start out with a new dynasty. The dynasty comes in, the leaders have some skills at ruling, they're able to take over. Oftentimes, they're really good at being generals at tactics and strategy. Over time, those skills erode because the people that take over, that succeed the initial emperor or king, don't have the need to have those skills. They haven't developed those skills because they didn't have to learn it. They encounter new problems. So it moves from being a new dynasty to something historians kind of classify as an aging dynasty. Problems begin to arise. Oftentimes, this might be rebellion. The mandate of heaven often indicates that if things like disease, famine, rebellion, invaders, all these things are happening and a dynasty, if an emperor or a king isn't able to handle it, well, that all goes back to then the fact that they're losing the mandate of heaven, which justifies someone else taking over, okay? So these problems arise, and usually then a new dynasty comes in. After rebelling, you have a family. It could be a general. It could be an outside force, an outside leader. Coming in, they take over. They claim the mandate of heaven. There's actually rituals involved in getting this blessing. And they establish the new dynasty. Okay, and so we're going to look at an example. This is the Ming Dynasty, began in 1368 CE, so this is Common Era. It's closer to us, though still about 700 years ago. Began with this person that would become the Hongwu Emperor. Hongwu is, if you translate it literally in English, means vast military. He was originally a farmer. During the rule of the Mongols during the Yuan dynasty, and he would end up becoming a rebel warlord, leading a successful revolt against the Mongols, kicking them out and taking over China by 1368. Okay, he would establish a new capital at Nanjing, which would become Beijing. He would perform the rituals and he would get the mandate. Now, early on, some things happened, okay? And this is kind of, if you're thinking about the dynastic cycle, I want you to think about cause and effect, okay? So there are these little causes, or at least things that seem pretty small at the time. And over time, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. They kind of ripple. It's like throwing a rock into a pond. The ripples start really small, but when you look out to the edges of the pond, they become really big. So the Hongwu Emperor becomes the leader. Now, he was reasonably good at being a military leader. He'd beaten the Mongols. He'd united China, which meant he had to beat up a bunch of other warlords to do that. And so he had strength. He had skills related to that. He had a background as a farmer, so his skills as being a government leader, on the other hand, were kind of limited. Okay, he had some, because to be a warlord, he had to lead other people, but he was not trained in how to manage, how to lead, how to govern over a large population. And even in China during the Ming Dynasty, they had a huge population. Okay, and we'll get to that in a moment. So one thing, early on, he was kind of paranoid. He was concerned about the ability of others to make decisions. And so he centralized the bureaucracy, the government around him. So instead of having layers of individuals that might make decisions, it all channeled to him. And he reduced the decision-making of others, which this kind of caused a bottleneck because everything had to go to him. I was reading in China A New History, it talked about, for example, in one 8-day period, a historian had studied and found that more than 1,600 documents had been brought to him, involving almost 4,000 different decisions he would make. And at the rate he would make decisions, is the rate the Hongwu Emperor would make decisions, he would only be able to address 200 documents a day, and each one would only get about 3 minutes. Okay, and you think about that with like our president only spending 3 minutes on making major decisions that would affect tens of millions of people. Wouldn't be really successful in the long run. And that's what happened with the Hongwu Emperor. In 1393, this is kind of late in his reign, he reigned from 1368 to 1398, so 5 years away from the end of his reign. The Chinese government did a census and it put the population at a little bit more than 60 million. So we're talking about tens of millions of people with one person making all the big decisions. It's all channeling to him. And so what it began as kind of a small thing, over time, as his successors came, the Ming Dynasty began shifting from this new dynasty, okay, where they might make some small decisions that really over time have this effect, to an aging dynasty. They began having issues both externally and internally, some of these pretty soon during the Hongwu Emperor's reign. They had some financial issues. They had issues with pirates. There were pirates along the coast between Japan and China. Most of these were Chinese pirates, though the Chinese government labeled them mostly as Japanese. And they also had invaders coming in. The Mongols were still around, but there were also other groups of people that would invade. And so the Ming Dynasty had a lot of difficulty dealing with these problems. And looking at it, it would be pretty obvious to people at the time that maybe the Ming Dynasty was losing the mandate of heaven. The Ming Dynasty would close China off from the world, and really because they weren't able to absorb new ideas and new technology, they began to stagnate. This would lead, and so we've talked about new dynasty, aging dynasty, all these problems that would arise. Well, another family would end up coming in. In 1644, and actually a couple years before that, there was a group of people in northeastern China. It really wasn't a part of China back in the day, but now it's recognized in northeastern China. In fact, it's up by where I visited, up by Ansan and Shenyang. a group of people called the Manchus would invade, and they would establish a new dynasty called the Qing dynasty. So that'd be in 1644, the Ming dynasty had collapsed. So you can see how it developed from being a new dynasty and having a lot of success to an aging dynasty. Problems would arise that it just wouldn't be able to take care of. And another dynasty would come in and claim the mandate of heaven.